Welcome to the inaugural Desertification Island Discs. I'm Dan Botterill, and I'm joined today by a very special guest, David Newman. Hello, David.
Hi, Dan. How are you? Good to see you.
Where have you joined us from today, David?
Well, it's a beautiful sunny day up here in Northumberland, and I'm on the coast. As you know, with the last few days we've had beautiful weather, and the palm trees are blowing, and the sea's inviting. It's a little bit chilly yet, but in a couple of weeks' time we'll be in there swimming.
Yeah, lovely. I'm in London, as you can see, Canary Wharf. I've just stayed here because I can't leave it behind. So
yeah, I know it's a tragedy what's happened to our cities. And as they've become hotter and hotter, people have left them. It's really hard to live in them.
Absolutely. So thanks, David. Well, first of all, obviously, the idea of this little chat is a bit tongue in cheek, really, but there is a serious message behind it all. But our aim today really is to get to know you a bit, talk a bit about your background in sustainability, what makes you tick, and also just to kind of have a bit of fun, really. So as you can see, it's a completely original idea, this, developed by us at Ditto Sustainability. No one's ever tried this before or anything like it, so it's uncharted territory. So we'll kind of give it a go and see where we end up. But for those of you that don't know David, just a bit of a kind of background, David, I think would be good. I first met you probably about 4 or 5 years ago. You were speaking in Amsterdam at a conference. And I remember leaving that meeting thinking, wow, this guy knows about sustainability. Finally I've met somebody that can teach me about the circular economy or understand what the circular economy is now. So I'd kind of recommend anyone out there to go and have a listen to David if you see him talking, because he's very passionate about it, very experienced in this area. And yeah, I think a lot of the things that I heard David talk about that day, things that really helped us inspire the roadmap for Rio, our product moving forwards, especially from the circular economy perspective. So David, we were part of your fan club.
Well, thank you for your kind words. Thank you. Somebody said to me the other day, you say things so well, and I took that as a compliment. And my reply was, well, life's too short to tell each other lies. We are adults, we have to tell each other the truth, and I try to actually tell the truth, I suppose, but how I see the truth anyway.
I think so, and I think the way you're coming at it is from a sustainability perspective. I always find as well, it's not a purist hippie eco perspective. It's a balanced kind of practical perspective also. You might disagree with me saying that, but that's the way I look at it. I think it's the kind of logic's ingrained in the economy in terms of what the global economic footprint looks like, how that's moving forward. It's all kind of anchored in some sense. So how do you feel about that? Because I know your background as well, you interestingly worked in Greenpeace, didn't you, in Italy, kind of earlier on in your career, so in the 90s as well. So you've obviously got something kind of deep in there from a pure environmental perspective. But how would you kind of describe yourself now?
I'm finishing a book which is called Everything is Connected, and it talks about the various environmental challenges which the world faces and try to put them together. And of course, the connecting issue within each of the issues is money. Mm-hmm. Okay. Now, I really say in this book quite clearly, this is not a tirade against the capitalist system or against people getting rich. Hey, we all want to be well off. We want everybody to be rich. The question is how we use that money and where we employ it. And if we employ it in destructive activities, then we are actually, and as we have seen with the coronavirus, harming ourselves. So even from a purely selfish point of view, to pollute the air, to pollute the seas, and to cut down the forests is actually destructive of our own civilization. Mm. Now, that doesn't mean stop everything, stay at home and become a hippie. It actually means, no, let's employ our capital where it doesn't pollute. And you can make money out of solar panels and out of wind turbines and out of a million different types of things, which are not going to destroy the planet.
Absolutely. And I guess that, yeah. So where do you stand on this global warming versus climate change debate? And I guess in particular, it's obvious that you obviously believe in it and you can see the science behind it. But what do you think about those people that don't quite recognise the importance of it?
Well, I think there's two categories of people, aren't there, Dan? The first category, looking at it now from 2050, were those people who really were ignorant of the issues. And I don't mean that in a nasty sense. I mean, they didn't understand them. Okay, these were complex issues. We couldn't see it happening clearly. And it's clear that a lot of people are not perhaps informed or educated enough to have understood it. And now looking at that at a distance of 30 years away, it's clear that those people are very, very few, because they've lived through this last decades of climate change and they've all got the message. Then there are that category of people, and it's a very small but very influential category, who are in bad faith. They know that climate change is happening. They know that it's disrupting our lives. They know that it's disrupting the planet. They want to deny it because they want to continue with their business models. Those people make me want to throw up. They are criminals.
Absolutely, absolutely. So what could we have done to, let's say we are, obviously in 2050 now, that things have got serious, things have got bad. What should those people have done in 2020 that then, that they didn't do? What would have made the biggest difference, do you think?
Well, what's astonishing, Dan, is not 2020. I'm an old man, all right? So what's astonishing is in 1956, when I was born, and in 1956, Edward Teller, who was a nuclear physicist and one of those who built the bomb, declared that burning fossil fuels and putting CO2 into the atmosphere would change our climate. And in 1968, the American Science Council went to President Johnson with a report which then said, we will reach 400 parts per million of CO2 by the year 2000, and 800 parts per million if we burn all the fossil fuels there are. And that will be an absolute catastrophe for our climate. Now, that was when I was a kid. We knew it. And there is a very clear narrative of how the less gas, but the oil and coal companies have made sure that knowledge has remained either has either been classified as untrue. They've made a lot of doubt about it. They've put up skeptics. They put up climate change deniers, or they've hidden it away. And there is a complete chain over the last 50, 60 years of the oil companies hiding it. And they pay off the politicians. They pay hundreds of millions of dollars in lobbying. They've been hugely successful, and look at the mess we're in. Mm-hmm. So what could we have done? We could have stopped, the first thing, we could have stopped all the subsidies to the fossil fuel industries. And those subsidies are huge. Some 6% of global GDP back in 2020 was going to fossil fuel industries to produce the fuels which are creating this mess with our taxpayers' money. I can't get it. I mean, I think I'm reasonably intelligent, but I never really understood it. Here we are fighting climate change, and here we are giving subsidies to the people who are creating climate change. And, maybe you are more intelligent than me and can explain it. I can't get it.
No, I think there are some real perversities in the system. And I was looking at it in terms of air travel was one of the things I was looking at the other day and thinking about, in that when I was young, I was brought up in Hong Kong as a kid, and we'd, fly back from Hong Kong to England in the summers to see the family, etc. And the airline ticket in kind of total cost terms was the same price then as it is now in pounds. And so how is that? A, how is that possible economically? And B, the other side of this is, why should we expect that a flight costs 50 quid or 100 quid to get us somewhere?
Yeah.
Is that not the biggest kind of cultural issue that we have to address here? Because we've all, haven't we? We've all, I've flown to Rimini to Ecomondo. I've done that cheap flight and I've come back, and I've actually flown up to Scotland for a meeting because I can trust the rail system. We've all done these things, right? But isn't now the time for us to go, actually, we should pay more now. We know we should.
Well, I wrote a blog about it a couple of weeks ago, and in this I said we have to get used to the fact that we really have to tax out of existence polluting activities. And we have to use those taxes to make sure that low-income people have access to mobility. So if you're going to fly to Rimini, it's £1,000 return.
Yeah,
you can afford it. A few people will. that £1,000, 999 of it is tax. That will go to ensure that we have across Europe railways which can get you to Rimini in 7 or 8 hours in case you can't afford to fly. Okay, why should I, from my Northumberland beach now, I don't need to go to the Mediterranean, but back in 2020, you would have to fly to the Mediterranean really, unless you went to Nice, if you wanted to get there in a day. So why don't we use that tax that we put on carbon, that we put on fossil fuels, that we put on air travel, that we put on cars, fossil fuel cars, to make our railway system accessible to everybody and fast. We can go to Barcelona now in 5 hours from London if we want to, technologically. Like, why aren't we? Why aren't we? And let's do what Luxembourg has done. It's made all public transport in cities free.
Yeah.
And so price the goddamn car out of it so that people take public transport. Then if you're rich and you want to use your car, fine, you pay for it. That's okay. But we shouldn't punish poorer people who can't afford it by reducing their mobility.
Absolutely. So I guess this probably links into a bit of this, the vanity element of sustainability and kind of greenwashing, eco-washing. And I guess carbon offsetting is firmly in our sights now from that perspective. What's your view on the kind of the carbon offsetting and the net zero agenda as of 2020?
Listen, carbon offsetting, if you mean, companies buying up, pieces of woodland and planting trees on them, I think the judgment's out about whether some of that works and whether some of it doesn't. The fact is, Dan, it's really a way in which companies can feel good about themselves and make themselves look good towards the public and towards their consumers. Is it having any significant impact on reducing carbon emissions? The answer is, of course, absolutely none whatsoever. Is it better than doing nothing? The answer is yes, probably. Actually, it is.
Yeah. So is it? Yeah, you've got to actually do something because in theory, you could just not do anything, carry on normally, and just pay a bit of extra money and feel better about yourself and say you're net zero because you've offset everything. And that's what we've got to move away from, right? So
yeah, exactly.
Generally doing things, generally implementing efficiency, resource efficiency, and sustainability.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I don't want to be negative because there's a lot of really good people who have got their hearts in the right place who are really trying to do good things, okay? You guys are amongst them, but there's a lot of, positivity going on. And in the book that I've finished this summer, for example, forestation is a huge success story around the world. We've, globally, we've reduced the loss of forest dramatically over the last decade, and we're planting millions and millions of hectares of forest everywhere across the planet. Of course, then we're losing tropical forests in the Amazon to idiots like the Brazilian president and in Indonesia because of the corruption and in Russia. But there is a huge success story to tell about forests. So let's not be negative about it all. Sitting here in 2050, of course, it wasn't fast enough. That's the problem. It wasn't enough and it wasn't fast enough.
And I guess in the 2020 scenario, obviously the current timing's been hit by the whole COVID-19 pandemic. But where do you think we were going or heading in the short term around the circular economy agenda? Because that's something you're passionate about, something that you talk about a lot. Were we seeing successes? Is it moving in the right direction? Or is this going to knock us back a long way? What's currently going on as an excuse?
I had the privilege of being a sort of distant friend of Michael Braungart, who wrote the book, not on the circular economy. What was it called?
Cradle.
Cradle to Cradle. That's right. So I guess now 20 years ago. So that was the sort of first circular economy model. And again, whilst there's lots and lots of examples of companies and products looking at or actually implementing circularity policies and products, overall, this is not happening at a global scale. If you look at the Circularity Gap report, which was presented in Davos every year for the last 2 or 3 years, the circularity gap is increasing, not decreasing. So the planet actually is recycling some 7 or 8% in 2020 of the raw materials and the resources it uses. In other words, Dan, it's still more than 90% linear.
Yeah,
Now, we've been talking about circularity because we're in this environmental consultancy and environmental activism arena for the last 10 or 20 years. But I can assure you that out there, Mr. and Mrs. Smith living in Bolsover don't have a clue what circular economy means and are not discussing it at all.
Yeah, and I think that was one of when I remember that first time I saw you speak, and you put that graph up on the wall that showed commodity prices. You know, this whole concept of we're depleting resources. Yeah, commodity prices going down, and the whole thing just doesn't make any sense. So
yeah.
It's
we're getting, we're rushing towards a 9 billion world population, and we've done a fantastic job of feeding them all, a fantastic job of giving health and education to an increasing number of people, a fantastic job of making sure that people aren't sleeping out on the streets. And of course, there's still hundreds of millions of people, poor, hungry, and sleeping out on the streets. But we've done a fantastic job globally of bringing people into what we would like to think is a sort of more dignified way of living. And we've done all of that by decreasing the unit cost of everything we make, including food.
Yeah, absolutely. And we still waste loads of that.
Yeah.
So what do you think about the potential, just before we go to something a little bit more fun, the potential success of the Sustainable Development Goals? Where do you think, how successful have they been so far, based on their predecessor? And what do you think the future is for those goals?
One of my chapters in my book is dedicated to the Sustainable Development Goals, and it looks at we forget that the predecessor to them was the Millennial Development Goals, which expired in 2015. And the Millennium Development Goals, which were announced in 2000, so over 15 years, were phenomenally successful. By 2010, we'd met almost all of them before the 2015 deadline. And so the Sustainable Development Goals were calculated on and were agreed upon on a basis of having already achieved what seemed to be unachievable in the year 2000.
Yeah.
Okay, so the lessons from this for me was that when humanity decides to collaborate and gives itself targets to achieve, it's actually fantastic at it. We actually really do a very, very good job when we all go for it. It's when we divide and we don't go for it together that calamity exists. So where are we today with the Sustainable Development Goals? Well, it's a little bit too early to say, because they were adopted in 2015, and really countries only adopted them into their own policies in the last 2 or 3 years. But the UN Secretary General, in his last report on them in 2019, highlighted a lot of positive aspects. For example, access to education, access to medical care, increasing gender equality across the globe, and so on. And he highlighted a lot of disappointments and a lot of failures. And most of those failures came down to the fact that we're not investing enough money. So, whilst you have increased access to medical care and training of doctors and nurses, as soon as you pay for those doctors and nurses to be trained in third world countries, they're getting on an airplane, they're coming here. Mm-hmm. So actually the number of doctors and nurses that you've got in developing countries that they are paying for their education is declining. The number of teachers that you have is declining because the budgets for the education system are insufficient, and so on. So, we really need to make a step change if we're going to, by 2030, achieve a lot of those goals. But we can. Mm-hmm. We can. That's the important message.
Absolutely. All right, I think now we'll jump into some of the fun bit. So we gave you the easy task again. So you had to pick 7 songs, you had to pick a box set, and you had to pick a gadget. And this is what you had to pick that day that you were told you've got to leave your home, you've got to get out of here. And these are all you can have in terms of your worldly possessions that are luxurious, shall we say? So it's a tough one, and I've seen your choices, and are very eclectic, shall we say. So why don't you tell us a bit about your choices? And just, I should say actually that David's songs playlist is going to be available via Spotify and Apple Music playlist.
Oh, you poor people.
So I've already listened to them. It was in my prep reading your CV. It's what I had on in the background. So, but yeah, tell us a bit about it anyway.
Well, I mean, the first thing is that, knowing that Wi-Fi had broken down, I couldn't take my iPad with all my songs on them. So I had to choose some of the albums, and I chose, some of the more long playing CDs and even vinyl albums, which, the old rock concertos and also lots of symphonies and such like.
Mm.
But in terms of songs, you want to hear about songs. Well, songs have different meanings to people, and they have meanings in my life at different times in my life. So there are certain songs that I chose because they've gone through my life, and I still, as an old man, listen to them. And the first of those goes back to my parents' days in Rockhampton in Australia. I grew up as a child in Queensland in Australia, and I remember from early days a jazz tune by a Dave Brubeck quartet called Take 5. And I remember that because my mum used to, when I heard it on the radio, she used to pick me up and dance me around the living room because and cry to it because she was so homesick. And excuse me. And that's been I'm sorry.
That's all right. It's okay.
That's an abiding memory for me.
Yeah.
Then,
yeah. It does.
Then of course, you grow up and you become a teenager, and suddenly you realize there's a difference between boys and girls. and around about that time, I suppose, when I was a young teenager, the Beach Boys song "Good Vibrations" was probably bouncing around, and that little blonde girl with buck teeth and freckles on her face was the love of your life when you were 12 or 13 years of age, and Good Vibrations was probably around about that time.
Excellent. I love that record. Love the Beach Boys. Yeah, and perfect for where you're living now, the surfing that you can do.
Yeah, well, I'm not a great surfer. I tend to sort of fall in the water all the time, but a lot of the young people are out here surfing. They have to be careful of the sharks, of course.
Yeah, those prehistoric monsters have come back into ascendancy, haven't they, somewhat?
Then at the end of the 60s, when I was sort of growing up, the song which I don't think really I understood at the time, but as always remained in my memory is "I Am the Walrus" by the Beatles. And they said that they wrote these lyrics to confuse people so that people would go away and study them and not understand them. And I've never understood them. And it's a long time now. It's almost 70 years. But the sort of the confusion and the chaos which there was, I remember as a kid on the end of the Vietnam era and the coming into the 70s and the Cold War era and the peace protests and such like. It sort of summed it all up. And it just brings that memory back to me so clearly, that time, before you were born, but that time when we didn't worry about climate change, we actually worried about getting nuked.
Yeah. Don't think we worry about that quite as much now, do we?
No.
Maybe
Well,
if Kim Jong's not there anymore, which in the news, but anyway,
I hope he's far enough away.
Yeah.
And then of course, that era, there was some great rock and roll music, and if I still, as an old man, get up and dance to Led Zeppelin's Rock and Roll. It's just the great, easiest, best rock and roll song ever. I think it's really fun to dance to. Has no meaning to it. Who cares? But it's great fun.
Oh, they're incredible, aren't they?
Yeah.
What do we have now that can compare with Led Zeppelin?
Well, there's some a couple of more romantic, or certainly a very romantic song from Van Morrison. Now, I could have put the two Van Morrison albums, which I love, Astral Weeks and Veed Fleece, the whole albums I could put on there. Absolute wonderful songs. But this rambling song of, you don't pull no punches, but you don't push the river. I don't know if anybody can ever interpret or understand anything that Van Morrison is saying. Don't ask me to. But it's such a lovely love song, and it's got a great rhythm to it. I think about my wife when I think about this, and it's just a wonderful romantic song.
Oh, we had Moon Dance as our first song at our wedding, me and my wife, which is a good one.
Yeah, that's a lovely song too. Yeah, it really is. And Ruins, I go back to the sort of environmental aspect here, and Cat Stevens wrote a lot of very nice ballads and love songs, etc. But he wrote two songs. One was Peace Train, and the other one was Ruins on different albums. And Ruins has remained in my head, and I think it's very apt for this moment in time. and especially sitting where you are with the background you've got. You know, and he sort of finishes it, you know, well, you'll have to listen to it, otherwise I'm going to sort of become emotional again. But it's got a lovely, you know, last few words in it, which are beautiful.
That's it. Yeah, absolutely.
And finally, London. You know, I miss London terribly, and I know it's an uninhabitable place now in 2050. But I remember this song from the Editors, which was, I suppose, around about 2015 or 2016. And, you know, in this light and on this evening, London is the most beautiful thing I've seen, something like that. It's you know, it's a rather sort of dark sort of song, but the message is really clear. It really is, you know, an ode to this beautiful city.
Absolutely. It's great. Yeah, great choices. Yeah, really looking forward to listening to those again.
Yeah, but you know, I come back to the rock operas if you will allow me, and you know, I still listen to, because of course, you know, rock music is in your childhood, isn't it? It's when you're a teenager, you know. And so I listen very much to Quadrophenia and that old battle of the mods and the rockers on Brighton Beach, and you know, and songs and the albums by Pink Floyd and Yes and King Crimson. You know, these are sort of rock operas of our time, of our youth, and I still have those very, very close to me.
Well, yeah, absolutely. I think well, when I was growing up, my parents always had well, my dad had quite, I'd say, quite similar taste to yours actually. But I do remember like a lot of the Beatles. that was on a lot. But how can it not be? It's
Sure.
The finest songwriters ever.
Yeah.
Arguably. But I love the Eagles as well and things like that. You know,
yeah.
And so, but yeah, no, it's like fascinating. Thanks for taking us through those. And then
choosing 7 songs, you know,
so easy, isn't it? Yeah.
over a lifetime is not easy here.
It's impossible. But those, you know, if you had to, so you know, sometimes we have to make tough decisions, right? So
yeah.
And then you've gone and broken the system already. In our first inaugural kind of pilot episode, we asked for a box set. So what have you given us now? And bear in mind, you know, making electricity pretty easy now, you know, with solar panels and diesel generators that are lying around all over the place. You decided to ignore that. And what have you taken instead?
Well, you know, I'm not a great lover of the television, and I'm, you know, during at the time that you were locked down there with the coronavirus, I watched more of it than ever I have in my life. And so, you know, I really have not box set anything. I mean, I can possibly think about 1 or 2 that I remember, but nothing that struck me enough that I'd want to continue to see it.
Yeah.
But there are some books that I continue to read, and I've read time and time again. You know, I'm going to sound like a really boring old fart, but you know, War and Peace by Tolstoy is just an absolutely magnificent book. You know, I got a degree in modern history and reading of that Napoleonic period, but you know, in the detail of how people lived, and in the detail of how people fought and how people killed each other, and the wider sort of panorama he gives of Napoleon sweeping across Europe and then sweeping back. He gets to Moscow, he wins the war, but he's lost.
Yeah.
He's defeated. It's quite extraordinary, and it's an absolutely amazing work to distill it into 1,000 pages. I think it was Woody Allen who once said, "Yeah, I learned to speed read, and I read War and Peace in an hour. There's a lot of snow and Russians in it." Yeah. There's a lot more than snow and Russians. And the other fantasy book that I've always loved is Lord of the Rings. It really is a great story. You know, the story of good and evil, monsters against humans, and the little men save the day in the end. It really is a beautiful book, and it has you know, happy endings and such like. And Austerlitz is one of those books which I'm going to pass over very quickly because I get very emotional about it. Read it. It's an absolute work of genius. It's about the Kinder transports.
Okay.
It's just an absolute stunningly written work of genius. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that box set choice there, David. First of all, it's excellent reading for people. You might want to tag on James Joyce Ulysses to that list, I guess.
I bought it about half a dozen times, and I never ever read it. But there's a lot of people I gave it away to, and I guess they never read it either.
I remember I won a prize at school when I was 15 or something, and it was like a book prize, and you had to choose your book you wanted, and then it was presented back to you, and they had the bishop came and gave out these books and awards, and I chose James Joyce Ulysses. Just went for the most pretentious choice I could think of, and he didn't talk to anybody apart from me, and he said, "That's such a great choice, son. It's such a lovely book. You'll really get into it." I've not got past the first chapter.
No, it's awful. It's awful.
Really struggled. I think it's shaving for the first chapter or something. Anyway.
I'd like to meet someone who's actually read it.
Yeah, I know. Maybe I'll read a review of it. That's the way to do it. I guess, okay, right, finally then. So if you're cynical of the technology capabilities up there by the coast, so gadget-wise, if you're choosing a gadget to take...
Well, I've got a beautiful hand-carved knife. It's a fold-away thing. I should have got it for you to show you. And it's I bought it many years ago, and I'm very attached to it. When I go out walking, I take it with me, and it's so important to have a knife. To these the summer evenings that are coming, to sit by the beach and carve a bit of wood and just meditate. But also when you're cooking and I go out and collect coconuts from the trees and things like this, and getting up a tree and cutting down the coconuts. And having a knife really is it's just a comfort gadget. I can't have my iPad anymore because Wi-Fi is screwed up. It's just a comfort thing that I feel happy to have it with me.
It's good for self-defense with all those crazy animals around now.
Well, there's not many animals left. We wiped the forests out, and apart from feral cats and dogs, there aren't very many left.
True, that's true, and the locals.
There's lots of feral locals. Yes.
All right. Well, I think so. What we'd like to do, just to finish off, David, is actually just get your insight on a couple of things for people. So one of the things we're trying to do with Ditto and Rio is help people to live more sustainably. Like whether you're an individual or you're a business, so how do you actually how can you be more sustainable? So from your perspective, if there's an individual out there looking to live their life more sustainably, what kind of things would you recommend they look at or do?
I'm sure that people who are listening to you and I, Dan, are possibly already, moderately well informed. And so nothing that I say will be of any surprise to them. And a lot of it is about just living modestly. You don't need to have a big 4-liter engine car. You don't need to go on holiday 10 times a year flying all over the world. You don't need to eat steak every day and such like. And it's about living modestly and trying to think about some of the choices you make. And when you do make them the first time, actually you get used to them very quickly. My wife and I, we hardly eat any meat now. We just sort of wiped it out of our diet. And it's, we eat fish, but it's actually quite easy to do. We eat a bit of meat occasionally, fine, but not every day like one did. We don't have a car anymore. Well, we've got nowhere to go. We're old people, so we don't need a car. We walk around. Thank God there's still a bit of public transport left up here, and we can use that when we need to. Of course, we don't fly anymore. There's south of here is pretty horrible. Look at London, and when you go to the Mediterranean, it's all desert anyway. So where would you go? So when you start to do these things and you start to think about living modestly, that's all it is. It's actually about living modestly. And if you do, let's come back to 2020. And when you go to the shops and buy things, we all need furniture. Well, make sure that the furniture comes from a sustainably sourced, certified sustainably sourced forest if it's wood. Make sure that you buy things which, as much as you can, which have been used secondhand and recycled and reconditioned before you go out and buy a new one. Look how energy consuming your fridge or your washing machine is going to be. And look at your food and choose, if you can, and where it's affordable, organic. It makes a big difference, not just to the quality of your health and the food you eat, but also to farming and to the quality of soils and the water that flow off of farms. So, you know, there's just lots of these little things. And if we were to do them, as many people are doing, more and more, and cumulatively more and more, it will make a big impact.
Okay, no, absolutely. I think we've all, in the current time with the COVID, we've all managed to adjust our lives to live probably perhaps a bit more simply. I think speaking from my personal perspective, you know, a lot of that's been great. So,
yeah,
you know, avoiding travel, who wouldn't, you know, a normal hour and a half commute into London. That's great, having to do that, put it that way.
Yeah.
So,
well, you know, in this article I wrote a few weeks ago, I said that, you know, as we're doing now, that the day of seminars and the day of, you know, meetings is gone, it's finished.
Yeah.
Anybody who owns an office block better think about turning it into houses, because people are not going to go to the office anymore. Why would you?
Yeah, it makes you feel for WeWorks and places like that, doesn't it? Where
not really. I don't feel for them at all. But you know, but seriously, you know, the offices are going to be heavily over-dimensioned now. People are, you know, people are going to be moving out in 2020. People are going to be moving out of big cities because they don't need to go into them so often anymore.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I was thinking, you know, from this having run and set up quite a few startups or businesses from startup, that you will often have this thought that you all need to have an office or you need to get together. I think what this proves is you absolutely don't. If you're working with agility and using and embracing technology, there's no need for that expensive office in the centre of London. It just doesn't make any sense financially. You should obviously still do. I think one thing we are missing is people contact at the moment, but
sure.
We will get that. It'll just be less frequently and it'll be high quality.
Sure.
So yeah, I agree with you there.
I was speaking to somebody the other day who sells software technology, and he was saying to me, you know, I'm in one country, all my customers are in another country, and you know, normally I would be on a train or a plane going around and meeting them. So that's never going to happen again. We've all got used to the fact that they're buying my technology and I'm talking to them exactly like you're talking to me now.
Absolutely.
And they don't actually want me to come to see them anymore. There's no need.
Yeah, absolutely. So, you know, that question was, you know, from the consumer, it's gone into business, but yeah, is there any, you know, what about from a business perspective, if you were giving a business any tips on how they could be more sustainable, where should they start?
You know, I was with Brewdog. I don't know if you know Brewdog, the brewing company, a few weeks ago, and talking to them about what they do. And I said to them, you know, you've got a lot of energy consumption because, you know, you're a brewery. So look at that. How can you reduce your energy consumption to a minimum? And how can you make sure that energy consumption is coming from a renewable resource? Secondly, you've got a lot of waste because you're a brewery. So you've got a lot of the stuff which comes out the other end that people aren't drinking from the brewery process. What can you do with that? Well, we sell it at the moment as animal feed. Okay, well, perhaps you can make energy out of it too. So you can perhaps become a self-supplier of energy using that waste before you actually think about using it as an animal feed. And we should be, you know, eating less animals anyway. And then they got a lot of tin cans and glass bottles from the product that they sell. Well, there you really can't do very much, because once people take that away and they put it in their homes, you lose control of it. But what you can do is you can support politically a business model in which there are deposit return schemes, in which there is extended producer responsibility, which makes the packaging pay for all the cost of its collections, and so on. And so that's a political activity which you as a business can undertake, and that is to push for change, which makes it easier for those materials to return into the economy. So that was one example. I mean, every business will have its own different model, but it's about energy, isn't it? Yep. It's about the resources you use and using them most efficiently, and it's about trying to make as little waste as possible and paying to ensure that waste is collected.
David, Thank you very much. It's been a learning experience. Thank you for being such a good sport and taking part.
It's been a pleasure, and excuse me being emotional, but
no, look, we the other news that I kind of admitted at the start was David's just been voted number 7 in the Resource magazine Hot 100 of resource management professionals, and which we think is an absolute travesty. Like, how are you not number 1 in?
Well, I think I'm very honoured, given that we have I run a very small association, a very sectorial association, to even be in the top 100, and so I'm very honoured with that result. But I think that if people have voted for me, it's because I actually try to tell them, how it is.
Mm.
And one of the questions you mentioned to me that you may have asked me was about greenwashing and who's best at greenwashing. And when I sit in the same room as the guy, and I do, unfortunately, the guy from Coca-Cola, or I sit in the same room with the guys from ExxonMobil. I mean, I don't want to end up in prison for murder, but you actually just really want to insult these people for just making fun of citizens and making fun of the community with their greenwashing publicity. I mean, they're making fools of us.
Oh yeah,
and we bought into it.
Yeah, I remember sitting with you at some conference a couple of years ago, and there was a guy from Costa talking about how great they were with it, and you think of the coffee cups, etc. And it's a big bugbear of ours. So thanks for naming those people. They should be shamed. And we should genuinely try and do this properly and find really good best case examples to promote. And we've got to recognise, it's fine to start now, and it's fine to just put yourself out there and explain what you're doing and what you're planning on doing. If you have been doing things maybe incorrectly, so what? Just change your ways now, move it to. It's not too late.
Well, listen, if we've got 1 second, I would just say this: I don't care a damn that ExxonMobil are making money out of selling gas or plastics or oil or whatever. That's their business model. Mm. And if they were just upfront, straightforward, in our face, we sell oil, gas, and plastics. That's our business model. I have no problem with that. What I have a problem with is that those same people finance climate change skeptics. They finance extreme right-wing groups that fight back against the environmental agenda, that they pretend to us that they actually are looking at alternatives to move us away because they admit that oil and gas and coal, etc., is bad for us. Mm-hmm. And therefore, they put out the hypocrisy that they are part of the change. They're not. They are the problem. And it's that hypocrisy which is absolutely stunning. BlackRock announced, this January how they were going to go on a sustainability crusade. Well, if you look at Amazon Watch, which is a website that I'm linked into, BlackRock are the principal financiers of all the abattoirs around the Amazon basin where cattle are now grazing where there was forest. They are the principal number 1 financiers. So don't give me this hypocritical crap about you're trying to save the environment when actually you are financing its destruction. That gets me. It's the hypocrisy which gets me.
I saw that something released last week or the week before around the BlackRock SDG fund, and when I went to look into it, there wasn't a huge amount of information there. But isn't the thought of an SDG fund kind of like a bolt-on vanity project, given the extensive nature of where all your other assets or investments are, so that you just go, okay, and here's a nice bit that we just do SDGs on. So we'll just put 100 million in there when our trillions are elsewhere.
Exactly. And probably that 100 million can all be written off against tax because it will go down as charity donations. Mm-hmm. So it won't come out of the bottom line. It will come out of the tax bill. So in other words, you and I are paying that 100 million, not them. And it's exactly the same as the Procter & Gamble announcement with the big plastics companies that they were putting $1.5 billion into recycling plastics. Well, it was $1.5 billion over 5 years, provided that other people put in also $1.5 billion. Mm-hmm. So it's not $1.5 billion at all. And it's and again, it's just a drop in the ocean to compare to what we need.
Absolutely.
So they are part of the problem. And if you can just be honest and don't take me for a fool and have an adult conversation about it, we can get to the solutions more quickly.
Absolutely. I think there's a whole theme of transparency here that we can pick up on in the next conversation. So when we've been doing this for 5 years, David, we'll come back to you for
that's your job.
For our number 100, our 100th one of these. If we get that far, we'll do it again with you and see how far we've got.
I hope so. I'll be sizzled by then.
Yeah, but listen, thanks so much for your time, and thanks for your amazingly eclectic playlist. It's like I said, it's going to be available. We're going to link to it via the kind of Rio or Ditto sustainability account. We're going to post these videos up on Rio Engage after we do them. Our intention is to try and do at least one a month of these. So thank you, David, for being the first, the guinea pig.
Well, thank you for the invitation, and it's been a pleasure to talk to you.
It's been great to see you. So until next time, everyone be sustainable. See you soon.
Bye.
Bye.